One of the sections of your book that I really loved, it was chapter 2, where you get into alchemy and you get into, a discussion of, it was one of the richest chapters for me.
Helen Lewis said I sounded like a stoned undergraduate.
I must like stoned undergraduates. It was so
interesting, because she wrote this review in The Atlantic, and I was talking about, sorry, I'll let you get back to this right away, but
sure.
She was talking about, I commented on this, the snitch in Harry Potter, because I found that it's a very old symbol. That's a really old symbol. It shocked me to death that she used it. I couldn't believe she used it because it's really obscure, this symbol. And so I talk about it in the book. And she, that's what she dismissed as the ravings of a stoned undergraduate. But then I thought, well, look, Rowling is richer than the Queen. She came from nothing. She produced this empire. It's an absolute empire. Books that were 600 pages long that she could read to children in stadiums. A whole string of movies that dominated the entertainment landscape for like 6 years. It was a global cultural phenomenon. It's like, well, don't you think that's worth looking into? That's what makes you a stoned undergraduate? Or are you so clueless that you can't see that when something like that happens, there's a mystery? It's why in the world would the story of a magical orphan become a multi-billion-dollar, decades-long global cultural phenomenon? Well, if you're interested in culture, if you're interested in anything besides narrow politics, you'd think that would be worthy of investigation. It's not easy to see these things sometimes for the mystery that they are.
No doubt.
So,
and I think it's what you say about stories. Stories can be true stories. The story of Harry Potter and the Snitch is a true story because it's in resonance with a real idea, something that's in the collective consciousness, something that's in our primordial psyche in a way. And so when we hear it,
otherwise
portrayed,
it wouldn't be collective.
Exactly.
We wouldn't all enjoy it. And look, we can go to those movies. We suspend disbelief willingly, instantly, and we get immersed in the story. That's magic. That's magic. What's going on? It's worthy of investigation. Yeah. So anyways, I sort of sidetracked that.
Well, that's actually exactly where I was going. So okay. I'm going to read this section, and you're talking about the snitch as the alchemical symbol of the round chaos. And you say this: the seeker is the person who is playing the game that everyone else is playing, and who is a disciplined expert at that game, but who is also playing an additional higher order game, the pursuit of what is of primary significance. The snitch, like the round chaos, can therefore be considered the container of that primary significance. So for those of us who don't know the Harry Potter movie, there's a game called quidditch, and it's basically like lacrosse, and you try to get the ball in the goal, but there's a seeker who actually is seeking this magical golden orb, which has alchemical kind of roots in the round chaos. And if they seek that, the game is over. And it's been given that, additional, as you say, primary significance. And this concept was really, really interesting to me to have it unpacked, because I watched some Harry Potter and I saw it and I saw the game. That, of course, didn't occur to me. It was just like, oh, this is the rules to this game. But then I realized in my own life, there's the game that I'm playing. Oh, I'm running on it and I'm doing these things. But what is my snitch? What is my round chaos? What is that ultimate higher order potential that I'm seeking? And so my question was, have you thought about for you, because we can obviously see the game being played as far as the normal Quidditch game, but for you personally, what is your snitch? What is your round chaos that you're seeking, the game within the game that you're playing at large? Well,
what's always attracted my attention predominantly, so let me unpack some things here, is
sure.
that some of the interpretation of that symbol, a lot of it came from my reading of Jung, because he's the only person that I've ever read who seems to know about such things, even knows that they exist. Jung believed that your interest, which is a relatively involuntary phenomenon, right? You get interested in things, but you can't make yourself interested in something. The interest grabs you and grasps your attention. And so Jung thought of that as a deeply seated biological mechanism, which it obviously is. It's a neurological mechanism of some sort that governs it possesses, it has the capacity to possess your voluntary attention, just like hunger does. When you get hungry, you're typing away, writing a book or something, and you get hungry, hunger starts to grab your attention. Well, look, you're interested in some things and you're not interested in others. Well, why? Well, some of that has to do with your choice, but not that much. A lot of it has to do with who you are in the deepest sense. And Jung believed that you were likely to become interested in things that furthered your development, furthered your psychological development, made you more and more competent. So, for example, you might get interested, you might really come to admire someone, and so what they do grabs your interest. And that happens with children quite a lot, and they get interested in kids who are slightly ahead of them in the developmental curve, and then they mimic them. And so the interest is something that grabs you to move you forward on the developmental curve. And so it's the manifestation of your potential higher self in the present. And Jung described that as the self. The self was, in his view, the totality of your being. It's not definable. It includes you in the future. And you are in some sense, something that's coming to be into the future. Hopefully to be more than you are, although, not always, because we also degenerate. In any case, your interest pulls you along on a particular developmental pathway. I've always been gripped in some sense by things that are very, very dark. And most of what's by pathology of one sort or another, which is, of course, partly why I'm a clinical psychologist, but I wanted to remediate it. I wanted to help, but it was the compulsion to investigate the darkest of darkness. And whether that's been good for me or not, well, that's a different question. I suppose it has been extremely good in some ways, and it's been complicated. We could certainly say that, but then more, I wanted to figure out what would protect us from that darkness. And I guess it was because I was so shocked, existentially shocked, when I first encountered writings that pertain to the Holocaust and to other genocidal acts of that sort. And I was always interested in that for some reason from a psychological perspective. It's like, what compelled people to do that? And how can we not do it again? And that, so anyways, anything that focused on that grabbed my interest. That's why I read Jung extensively, and Nietzsche and Dostoevsky and Solzhenitsyn. Those are the people I ran across, others as well, who seemed to have some answers as far as I could tell. And so that's what it's been for me.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It might be my proclivity towards depression. I really have no idea. I'm a creative person by temperament, and I also have this depressive illness. Maybe it's the consequence of those two. I don't know. Who knows, right? Who knows what pulls you forward?
The ancients would typically externalize these forces, when they couldn't understand it. And you talk about that with the god Mercury. The god Mercury was the one that drew you to these different things. But
he's got wings and he flitters, and that's what your attention does. It pulls. It's like in Up, that Pixar movie. Every time there's a squirrel, the dog. That's their Snitch. That's the grip of instinctual forces. It's very comical, but and see, in human beings, I think it's unbelievably sophisticated, because I do believe that we're compelled to follow a line that leads to our further development. And I do think that involves mimicry of the hero, for example. The hero, psychologically speaking, is that figure which represents a potential stage of development for you. And you'll find your hero because you'll admire something or someone. And why is that? Well, I gave you the best explanation for that I can. That's the future you, in some sense, manifesting itself in the present, saying, here's where you could go. Yeah. And that's the instinct for growth.
Another aspect that they externalized was the idea of the daemon, which is almost like the mercurial impulse that's taken and stretched out for a long time. It's something that's continually drawing you towards some potential realization of what you're capable of. And they put that again in this kind of demigod landscape. But of course, that was just their way of understanding things.
Well, but it also makes a tremendous amount of sense. Like
sure.
to make rage a god like Mars. Well, yes. Why? Well, it's immortal. I mean, rage will be here long after you're gone. You're definitely its pawn at times. You know, it's not obvious who's in control when you're enraged.
Yeah.
In fact, at some levels of rage, that can even be a legal defense, because we recognize that you can be out of your head. Your normal personality isn't in control. And really powerful motivational forces have that transcendent reality. It's not, rage is older than human beings. It's really, really old. And it can have you in its grip. Sexual impulse is the same way. Hunger. All of these things are unbelievably powerful forces. And they don't just operate on the primordial level, as far as I'm concerned. There are sophisticated gods of motivation. And we are possessed by them when we do such things as go to movies. We don't notice as what the hell are we doing watching this movie? Why are we entertained by it? Why does it grip our interest? We don't know. We don't even question it. It's like, well, it's entertaining. It's fun. It's interesting. If it's interesting, you don't have to justify it. Then you think, right? Well, that's interesting in and of itself. If it's interesting, you don't justify it. And then someone can tap you on the head and say, look what you're doing. And you think, oh yeah, that's kind of odd that I'm doing that. What the hell am I doing standing in line for 3 days to see Star Wars when I'm an atheistic engineer? Right. What's going on here? Oh, look at that. It's a religious impulse.
Yeah.
And I don't have a religion. And so this is filling the gap. And that's why I go to Star Wars conventions. And I'm possessed by something that I haven't pursued.
Mm. One of the things that you wrote was really powerful for me to read, because to me, I think it described my snitch, my round chaos, that thing that I'm seeking underneath the games that I'm playing. And so I'm going to read this little snippet here. Who could you be? You could be all that a man or woman might be. You could be the newest avatar in your own unique manner of the great ancestral heroes of the past. What is the upper limit to that? We do not know. Our religious structures hint at it. How would someone who determined to take full responsibility for the tragedy and malevolence of the world manifest itself? The ultimate question of man is not who we are, but who we could be. That's it for me. I mean, for me, I read that, I was like, yep, that's it. There's the snitch with its wings and its golden, mercurious allure that I'm really chasing underneath all of this. And I enjoy all these other things, but
who could you be?
Exactly.
You see that in children. I watch little children play, and what they're doing, they're attempting to grow forward, but they toy with identities. My little granddaughter, I wrote about her in this book too. It's so funny watching her. She had Pocahontas, the Disney movie, and she had a Pocahontas doll, and she watched that movie a number of times. And then it's been a year now. She's only 3.5. For a whole year, she has 2 names, Scarlett and Ellie. And one's her middle name, but she's called one or the other, and seems to be perfectly comfortable with both. If you ask her if she's Ellie, she'll say yes. And if you ask her if she's Scarlett, she'll say yes. But if you ask her if she's Pocahontas, she'll also say yes. And then if you ask her if she is Scarlett, Ellie, or Pocahontas, she'll say she's Pocahontas. And she's been insisting on that for a whole year. And so she's playing out this role. I don't know how much of her imagination is devoted to it, but enough for this that's, if you're, how old are you? 40 something?
Just turned 40.
Yeah, okay. So, imagine that you had a fictional identity for 15 years. That's approximately the same relative length of time. And the kids, they weave up a fantasy world, and then they play out an identity in that. And then they weave out another fantasy world, and they play out an identity with that. And they shape that identity by their interactions with other children and adults. And hopefully they find an identity that suits them, that other people also accept. Because your identity has to be something that other people accept, or it isn't going to work for you. But that's all part of this exploration of who they could be. You know, it's the play is, in fact, the exercising of that realm of possibilities. And so a good father, a good parent for that matter, but I think at least is an archetypally paternal role, puts a border of security around the child, you know, and the mother might be inside that border of security when she has young children. And play can take place there. And the play is the investigation of multiple identities with the hope of finding one that is functional, that is also socially desired, because those things can't be dissociated. One of the reasons I think that the identity politics has bothered me so much, speaking of snitches, you know, it's bothered me. It's like, this bothers me. And I've only recently realized that some of it had to do with what I saw as limitations on free speech, which is I have to say the words that, you know, some authority or some population demands that I say, which I don't like. But there's something else too, which is that it's based on a very misleading theory of identity. Your identity is not just how you feel about yourself at this moment. And you can't impose that on other people because they don't know how to deal with that. Like, even if they wanted to, they wouldn't know the rules of the game. You have to negotiate your identity with other people. And so then you have to think of identity as something that's negotiated with other people. And so if you have an implicit theory of identity, like the one that seems to be increasingly dominating the cultural landscape, which is identity is something that's only subjectively determined and can also change from moment to moment, then you're misleading people as they develop because they come up with a very unsophisticated notion of what identity is. And that's not good, because that's core. And part of your identity is your value to other people. That's a huge part of it. And that's not subjective. That's other people make that decision.